Brooklyn always smelled like rain and ambition. Even on clear mornings, there was something damp in the air, as if the city itself remembered every disappointment it had ever hosted. Nathan Cole noticed things like that. He noticed textures, pauses, absences. It was part of what made him good at his job, and perhaps what made him dangerously attentive in love. The apartment on Dean Street had been theirs for nearly 4 years. Exposed brick, tall windows, a narrow balcony where Elena kept herbs she rarely cooked with. Nathan had designed the space with the patience of someone who believed permanence was a craft. Every shelf was measured, every lamp chosen for its warmth rather than trend. Elena used to tease him for that. "You design rooms like you're afraid they'll leave," she once said, barefoot on the hardwood floor, wine glass in hand. Maybe I am, he'd thought, but he never said it aloud. On the surface, their life moved with reassuring rhythm. Morning coffee, shared Google calendars. Weekend dinners with friends who admired how long they'd been together. 6 years sounded impressive when spoken out loud, like a small victory in a city that devoured relationships as easily as it did rent-controlled apartments. But lately, the rhythm had changed. Nathan noticed it first in the silences. Elena used to narrate her days, complaints about work, gossip from the media office, small triumphs when an article went viral. Now her stories ended quickly, as if edited mid-sentence. Her phone stayed face down on the table, screen dark, notifications muted. It wasn't paranoia, it was pattern recognition. One Thursday evening, Elena came home later than usual. Her coat smelled unfamiliar, not perfume, but something sharper, metallic, like someone else's cologne clinging by accident. "You okay?" Nathan asked from the kitchen. "Deadline ran late," she replied too quickly, dropping her bag without looking at him. He watched her move through the apartment as if she were a guest, careful not to disturb anything. She smiled when she met his eyes, but it was a practiced smile, the kind she used in meetings. That night, Nathan lay awake listening to her breathe. He wondered when love had become something he studied instead of felt. The discovery did not come with a scream or a scene. It arrived quietly on a Sunday morning, with sunlight spilling across the bed and Elena asleep beside him. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Once, twice. Nathan didn't reach for it at first. He wasn't that man. He believed trust was a discipline, but the screen lit up anyway. Can't stop thinking about last night. No name, just a number. Nathan sat up slowly. The room felt smaller, as if the walls had leaned in to listen. He didn't open the message. He didn't need to. Something fundamental had already shifted, like a building settling after a hidden crack. When Elena woke, he was already dressed. "Morning," she said, voice soft, searching his face. "We need to talk," Nathan replied. The words landed between them, heavy and inevitable. She didn't deny it. Not really. Her confession came in fragments. Loneliness, pressure, a mistake that didn't mean anything. She cried. She reached for his hand. She reminded him of everything they had survived together. "I thought you'd understand," she whispered. "I thought you'd forgive me." Nathan listened, quietly. What surprised him wasn't the pain, but the clarity. He realized forgiveness, in this case, would require him to become someone else. Someone smaller. Someone who could live inside a compromise that felt like a lie. "I don't hate you," he said finally, "but I can't stay." She stared at him, confused, as if he'd spoken another language. "People work through this," she insisted. "We can go to therapy. We can fix it." Nathan looked around the apartment, the life he'd built with such care. For the first time, it felt temporary. "I'm not leaving to punish you," he said. "I'm leaving because if I stay, I won't recognize myself." He packed a bag that afternoon. No slammed doors, no raised voices, just the sound of zippers and a future quietly folding in on itself. Elena stood in the doorway, watching him go, still believing this was a pause, not an ending. She was wrong. Nathan had always believed that betrayal announced itself loudly, through raised voices, slammed doors, or undeniable proof laid bare like a weapon. He was wrong. It arrived instead as a whisper, woven into the smallest habits of daily life. the kind most people dismissed as coincidence. But Nathan had built his career on noticing what others overlooked. And now those instincts turned inward against the woman he loved. It began with time. Elena's schedule used to be transparent, almost aggressively so. Shared calendars, color-coded events, reminders set weeks in advance. Now there were blank spaces, hours marked work without detail, evenings that shifted last minute. "Things are crazy right now," she'd said casually one night, scrolling through her phone while brushing her teeth. "You know how it is in media." Nathan nodded, though something in his chest tightened. He knew pressure. He knew deadlines. What he didn't know was why she'd stopped looking at him when she said it. Then there were the gestures. Elena had always been affectionate in unconscious ways, leaning into him while waiting for coffee to brew, resting her hand on his thigh at dinner parties. Those touches faded, replaced by polite kisses, brief and functional, like punctuation marks at the end of sentences, neither of them finished anymore. At night, she turned away sooner. Nathan told himself this was normal. 6 years dulled intensity. Everyone said that. Even the podcasts Elena listened to on her commute preached about evolving intimacy, about space being healthy. But absence had a texture, and this one felt sharp. One evening, Nathan noticed her phone vibrating on the kitchen counter while she showered. He was chopping onions, eyes burning, knife steady against the board. The screen lit up with a notification preview, quickly disappearing as if ashamed of itself. He didn't move. Instead, he finished cooking. He plated dinner. He poured wine. By the time Elena emerged, hair damp, wrapped in a towel, the moment had passed, but not the feeling. That stayed, lodged behind his ribs. "You okay?" she asked, noticing his silence. "Yeah," he replied automatically. "Just tired." That became his answer for everything. At work, Nathan found himself distracted. Client meetings blurred together. Renderings sat unfinished on his desk as his thoughts returned, again and again, to Elena's altered smile, to the way she guarded her phone like a fragile secret. He hated himself for noticing. Suspicion felt like a betrayal of its own. He remembered the early years, the way Elena had looked at him as if he were the only solid thing in a city that never stopped moving. She trusted him then, fully. How could he repay that by doubting her now? And yet, one Saturday afternoon, they attended a friend's rooftop birthday party in Williamsburg. Music floated over the edge of the building, mingling with traffic noise and laughter. Elena wore a black dress Nathan had never seen before. Simple, elegant, unfamiliar. "You look nice," he said. "Thanks," she replied, distracted, scanning the crowd. She laughed more that night, touched her hair when she spoke. At one point, Nathan watched her lean close to a man he didn't recognize. Their heads bent together in a way that felt intimate, conspiratorial. It meant nothing, he told himself. This is how people talk at parties. But when Elena returned to his side, she didn't introduce them. On the subway home, the car rattled through darkness. Elena scrolled through her phone, smiling at something on the screen, before quickly locking it when she noticed him watching. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," Nathan said. And it was true. Nothing concrete. Just a growing sense that he was standing at the edge of something he didn't want to name. That night, sleep evaded him. Elena's breathing steadied beside him, familiar and distant all at once. Nathan stared at the ceiling, tracing invisible cracks in the plaster, wondering when love had turned into vigilance. He began to replay conversations, searching for missed cues, her sudden interest in working late, the way she dressed more carefully for ordinary days, how she sometimes seemed elsewhere, even while sitting across from him at dinner. It was exhausting, this double consciousness, loving her while quietly bracing for impact. A week later, Elena canceled plans they'd made months earlier, dinner with Nathan's sister, who was visiting from Boston. "I forgot," Elena said, already slipping on her coat. "Something came up." "What kind of something?" Nathan asked, keeping his voice even. She hesitated just a fraction of a second too long. "Work." The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. Nathan stood alone in the apartment, surrounded by the life they'd built together, the shelves, the photographs, the future they'd discussed in careful, reasonable terms. Marriage, not urgent, but assumed. Children, maybe someday. All of it suddenly felt theoretical. He sat on the couch and allowed himself, for the first time, to consider the possibility he'd been avoiding. Not proof, not accusation, just the idea. What if she's choosing someone else? The thought didn't explode. It seeped in slowly, cold and undeniable. Nathan realized then that love did not make him blind. It made him hopeful. And hope, he understood now, could be dangerous. When Elena returned late that night, she kissed his cheek lightly and apologized again, already moving toward the bedroom. Nathan watched her go, noticing how she no longer waited for him to follow. He stayed on the couch. Lights off, city noise humming through the windows. Somewhere between doubt and devotion, something inside him began to fracture. Not loudly, but irrevocably. He didn't confront her, not yet. Some truths he sensed revealed themselves only when given space, and Nathan was running out of room to pretend. The confession did not come on the night Nathan expected it to. It arrived on an ordinary Tuesday, disguised as an attempt at normalcy. Elena suggested dinner. Not delivery, not leftovers. Dinner out. A small Italian place near Fort Greene they used to love, the kind with uneven tables and candles that melted into their own wax. The suggestion alone unsettled him. She hadn't initiated anything shared in weeks. Sure, Nathan said after a pause too long to hide. They walked there together, side by side, not touching. The city hummed around them, sirens in the distance, laughter spilling from bars, couples arguing softly on corners. Life uninterrupted. At the restaurant, Elena talked too much. About work, about a coworker who'd gotten fired, about a new editor who didn't understand boundaries. Nathan listened, nodding in the right places, aware that she was building momentum towards something she feared to say. When the food arrived, she stopped eating. "Nate," she said, eyes fixed on her plate. She hadn't called him that in years. "There's something I need to tell you." He felt it then. Not shock, not anger. Recognition, like finding a familiar crack in a wall you'd been pretending wasn't there. "Okay," he said. She inhaled sharply, as if preparing to dive underwater. "I messed up." The word hung between them, small and insufficient. "I didn't plan it," she continued quickly. "It just happened. I was lonely. You've been distant. I've been under so much pressure at work, and I didn't feel seen, and—" She stopped herself, eyes filling. "I'm not blaming you. I just need you to understand." Nathan waited. He had learned that silence made people tell the truth faster. "There's someone else," she said finally. "It didn't mean anything. Not like what we have." Didn't mean anything. He wondered how many relationships ended on those words. "How long?" he asked. She hesitated. "A few months." The room seemed to tilt. A few months was not a mistake. It was a season, a parallel life. "You love him?" Nathan asked. "No," she said immediately, almost offended by the idea. "God, no, it was just an escape, a way to feel wanted again." She reached for his hand across the table. He didn't pull away, but he didn't hold on either. "I never stopped loving you," she said. "This doesn't erase us." Nathan studied her face, the familiar curve of her mouth, the eyes he'd once trusted without question. He saw fear there, yes, regret, but also something else, expectation. She expected tears, rage, negotiation. She expected forgiveness. "We've been together 6 years," she went on softly. "People make mistakes, Nathan. We're not 20 anymore. We can work through this. Don't throw everything away because of one bad choice." One bad choice, repeated, carefully concealed, sustained by lies. Nathan thought of all the nights she'd come home late, all the conversations she'd edited, all the moments he'd blamed himself for feeling insecure. He felt strangely calm. "When were you going to tell me?" he asked. "I was going to," she said quickly. "I just needed the right moment." "Did you stop?" he asked. Her silence answered him. Elena squeezed his hand. "Please don't look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I've already lost you." The waiter came by, awkward, sensing the tension. Nathan ordered the check before the food went cold. Elena protested weakly, but he insisted. They walked home in silence. Inside the apartment, everything felt staged, like a set they were about to strike. Elena sat on the edge of the couch, shoulders curved inward, the posture of someone preparing to be forgiven. I'll do anything, she said. Therapy, transparency. I'll quit my job if I have to. I blocked him, I swear. Nathan leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, not defensively, but to anchor himself. Why do you think I'd forgive you? He asked quietly. She blinked. Because you love me. It wasn't arrogance, it was belief. In history, in endurance, in the idea that time invested demanded return. I do, he said. The words surprised her. But loving you doesn't mean I can stay. Her head snapped up. What? I can't unknow this, he said. I can't sit across from you and wonder where you really are. I can't become someone who checks your phone, who needs reassurance to breathe. That wouldn't happen, she said desperately. I'd prove it to you. You already proved something, he replied gently. Tears slid down her face. So that's it? You're just leaving? I'm not leaving tonight, he said, but I'm leaving. She shook her head, almost laughing. You're being dramatic. People survive worse. My parents, I'm not your parents, he said, and this isn't about survival. She stood, pacing. You're punishing me. No, he said, I'm protecting myself. The words settled heavily in the room. Elena stopped in front of him. I thought you were stronger than this. He met her gaze. I thought so too. That night they slept in the same bed, separated by a silence so vast it felt physical. Elena cried quietly, facing away from him. Nathan stared at the wall, counting breaths, aware that something irrevocable had already occurred. In the morning he packed a small bag. Elena watched from the doorway, disbelief hardening into panic. You'll cool off, she said. You always do. Nathan zipped the bag and lifted it from the floor. No, he replied. This time I won't. He paused at the door, hand on the knob. For a moment he considered saying something kinder, something softer. Instead, he said the truth. You thought I'd forgive you because of what we were, he said, but you didn't think about what this would make me. Then he left, and Elena stood alone in the apartment, finally understanding that forgiveness was never guaranteed, no matter how long someone had loved you. Nathan did not feel dramatic leaving the apartment. There was no cinematic pause on the stoop, no backward glance framed by regret. He walked 3 blocks before realizing he had no plan, only direction, away. He checked into a modest hotel near downtown Brooklyn, the kind designed for business travelers who preferred anonymity to comfort. The room smelled faintly of detergent and old carpet. Neutral, temporary, it suited him. That first night, he sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, shoes still on, staring at the opposite wall as if it might eventually explain something. His phone lay face up beside him. No notifications, no messages from Elena. Yet, he wasn't angry. That was the most unsettling part. Anger would have given him shape. It would have justified shouting, blaming, destroying something visible. Instead, there was only a hollow quiet spreading through him, like a slow leak he couldn't locate. He tried to sleep. His body resisted. When he closed his eyes, memories surfaced uninvited. Not of the affair, but of the beginning. Elena laughing in a bar in the East Village, telling him she hated men who pretended not to care. Elena crying when he surprised her with plane tickets to Portland because she'd once said she wanted to see trees bigger than buildings. Elena whispering, I trust you, as if it were a vow. Trust. The word felt abstract now, like something from a textbook rather than a lived experience. The next morning, Nathan went to work as if nothing had happened. He showered, dressed carefully, chose a shirt Elena liked, and then changed it at the last moment for something plainer. He rode the subway surrounded by strangers, scrolling through their phones, each sealed inside private lives no one else could audit. At the office, colleagues greeted him with casual warmth. Someone asked about Elena. He answered automatically. She's good. The lie came easily. That frightened him. His desk faced a large window overlooking the river. Usually, he found comfort in the geometry of the city, the clean lines, the sense that things could be structured, made stable. That day, everything looked provisional. During a client meeting, his mind drifted. He thought about how Elena had framed the affair. Loneliness, pressure, a need to feel seen, rational explanations, almost therapeutic in tone. She hadn't begged exactly, she had reasoned, as if fidelity were a negotiable clause in a long contract, amendable under stress. Nathan realized something then, quietly and without drama. Her betrayal hadn't just broken trust. It had rewritten the meaning of love for him. Love he'd believed was safety, a place where vigilance could rest, where effort didn't require performance. Elena's choice, repeated, sustained, concealed, suggested something else entirely. That love could coexist with deception, that intimacy could share space with substitution. If that was true, then what was love worth? By lunchtime, his phone buzzed. "Elena, please talk to me. We can fix this. You don't have to do this." He stared at the screen, waiting for emotion to rise. It didn't. He typed, then erased several responses. None felt honest. Finally, he set the phone face down and went to get coffee alone. Over the following days, the messages escalated, apologies, explanations, memories deployed like evidence. "Remember when we said we'd never give up on each other? 6 years doesn't disappear overnight. I made a mistake, not a different life." Nathan read them all. He did not reply. He wasn't trying to punish her. He simply didn't know how to speak from a place that no longer existed. At night, in the hotel room, he examined himself with the same careful scrutiny he used on unfinished projects. He noticed how his chest felt tight when he imagined returning. How the idea of lying beside Elena again filled him not with longing, but with fatigue. He understood then that something essential had shifted inward. Before, love had expanded him, made him generous, patient, willing to bend. Now the thought of bending felt like erasure. This wasn't pride. It wasn't ego. It was self-recognition. One evening, he opened his laptop and reread old emails between them. Early messages full of anticipation, inside jokes, careless optimism. He stopped halfway through, heart steady, not aching. He wasn't numb. He was withdrawing. Nathan realized that betrayal didn't always demand confrontation. Sometimes it simply altered the internal math so completely that the equation no longer worked. Elena showed up at the hotel unannounced on the 5th day. He just returned from work when he saw her in the lobby, standing rigidly near the elevator bank, coat clutched too tightly around herself. She looked smaller than he remembered, frightened. "Nathan," she said, relief and fear colliding in her voice. He felt a flicker then, not anger, not desire, responsibility. They sat in the lobby, voices low. "You can't just disappear," she said. "That's cruel." "I told you I was leaving," he replied calmly. "This isn't leaving. This is erasing yourself." He considered that. "Maybe I need to." She searched his face as if trying to locate the man who used to soften at her distress. "I don't understand how you can be so cold." "I'm not cold," he said. "I'm clear." Tears spilled over. "I made a mistake. Why does that define everything?" "Because it changed how I see myself with you," he answered. "I don't feel safe being who I was anymore." She reached for him. He stepped back, not dramatically, just enough. That movement said more than any argument could. They sat in silence until Elena stood, humiliated and desperate. "So that's it," she said. "You're just done." Nathan met her gaze, steady. "Yes." She left without another word. That night, Nathan slept for the first time in weeks. In the morning, he booked a longer-term rental in another neighborhood. Then, without ceremony, he requested a transfer at work to a firm office in Seattle. Temporary, he told himself. Space to recalibrate. As he packed his few belongings, he understood something with painful clarity. Walking away was not an act of strength or weakness. It was a consequence. Love had once been the place he measured himself against. Now, self-worth demanded distance. And for the first time since the confession, Nathan felt something like relief. Not because he had won, but because he had stopped trying to save a version of love that no longer existed. The breaking point had not shattered him. It had made him step back and choose himself. Nathan did not announce his leaving. There was no final conversation framed as closure, no list of reasons delivered with careful emphasis. He had learned that explanations were often invitations to argue, to negotiate, to reopen wounds that had already sealed themselves in his mind. Instead, he dismantled his life quietly. The Seattle transfer was approved within days. His firm treated it as a professional opportunity, unaware it was also an emotional evacuation. He sold most of his furniture online, items that had once been chosen together now reduced to measurements and pickup times. What he couldn't sell, he donated. Objects, he realized, were easier to release than memories. On his last morning in Brooklyn, he walked the neighborhood once more. The cafe where Elena liked almond croissants. The corner where they had argued about nothing and laughed 10 minutes later. The park bench where they had sat during a blackout, sharing warm beer and impossible plans. He did not take photos. Some things he knew lost their meaning the moment you tried to preserve them. At the airport, he turned his phone off for the first time since he could remember. Not airplane mode, off. The small, decisive click felt ceremonial. By the time the plane lifted through low gray clouds, Nathan Cole had already become unreachable. Elena realized he was gone when the apartment felt wrong. It wasn't emptiness. She'd been alone before. It was the absence of trace. Nathan's shoes were gone from the entryway, his books missing from the shelf, the bathroom drawer empty except for her own things, suddenly too many. She checked her phone. No new messages, no missed calls. Panic arrived late, creeping rather than crashing. She texted him, "Where are you? Please don't do this." No response. She called, straight to voicemail. She called again, then again, as if repetition might override intention. That night, she slept on his side of the bed, clinging to the faint outline his body had left behind. In the dark, she rehearsed speeches, apologies sharpened by hindsight, promises that felt sincere even as she questioned their usefulness. In the morning, she went to his office. The receptionist smiled politely. "Nathan?" He transferred. "Transferred where?" Elena asked, pulse quickening. The receptionist hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm allowed to say." That was when Elena understood. This wasn't distance. This was disappearance. Days passed, then weeks. Nathan's social media accounts went silent. His email bounced back with an automated reply directing inquiries elsewhere. Mutual friends offered confused sympathy, claiming ignorance. Some avoided her entirely, as if proximity to her might be contagious. Elena replayed every conversation, searching for a moment she could have intercepted, something she could have said to anchor him. She fixated on his calm during the confession, mistaking it for softness instead of resolve. She had believed history was armor, that love accumulated interest over time, cushioning impact. She had been wrong. The silence was worse than anger would have been. Anger implied engagement, a shared emotional field. Silence meant she was alone with her guilt, forced to imagine his life without her. At night, she dreamed of him, not forgiving her, not returning, but standing just out of reach, face unreadable. She woke with questions pounding in her chest. Did he ever miss her? Did he regret leaving? Had she meant so little that he could erase her so completely? She would never know. Months later, she found a receipt tucked into an old jacket of his she hadn't noticed before. Coffee, 2 cups. Dated weeks before the confession. She stared at it for a long time, wondering if that was when he'd started to let go. The unanswered questions became their own kind of punishment. Elena learned that abandonment didn't always come with cruelty. Sometimes it came with restraint, with the devastating politeness of someone choosing not to look back. Nathan's absence reshaped her life in quiet, humiliating ways. She avoided places they'd loved. She flinched at strangers with his posture. She stopped telling their story halfway through, embarrassed by its unfinished ending. There was no confrontation to frame herself against, no final verdict. Just the echo of a door that had closed without sound. Seattle did not feel like a fresh start. It felt like neutral ground. Nathan chose the city because it promised rain, routine, and distance. 3 things he could tolerate without having to feel much about them. His new apartment overlooked an alley where delivery trucks idled every morning at 6. The walls were white, the furniture sparse. Nothing invited memory. At work, he performed well. Too well, some colleagues said. Focused, efficient, untethered. He became known as the architect who never talked about his personal life, who stayed late without complaint, who declined drinks after work with polite consistency. They mistook numbness for discipline. Nathan woke early, ran along the waterfront, returned to an apartment that echoed when he moved. He cooked simple meals. He read. He slept. And yet sometimes, without warning, he would pause mid-motion, gripped by a strange detachment, as if he were watching himself from a distance, performing a life he no longer felt fully inside of. He did not miss Elena the way he'd expected to. He missed being open. When a coworker laughed and touched his arm, he felt nothing. When a woman smiled at him on the train, curiosity never followed. Desire, when it appeared at all, felt theoretical, something remembered rather than experienced. Love, once instinctive, had become abstract. He tried dating. Briefly, apps, coffee, conversations that skimmed the surface and never dared to dive. The moment intimacy threatened to form, something in him retreated, quiet but absolute. It wasn't fear of betrayal, it was disinterest in repair. Nathan realized that part of him had shut down not to avoid pain, but to avoid investment. Caring now felt like a risk he had no appetite for. At night, he sometimes wondered if this was healing or merely survival dressed up as restraint. In Brooklyn, Elena's life contracted. The city that had once felt electric now felt accusatory. Everywhere she went, there were reminders, not just of Nathan, but of herself as she had been before the truth emerged. Friends chose sides without announcing it. Invitations dwindled. Conversations shifted tone. Some people treated her with careful sympathy, others with thinly veiled judgment. "So, how are you holding up?" became code for "what did you do?" At work, she threw herself into projects, chasing relevance and distraction. Her performance remained strong, but the office gossip was merciless. Someone had seen Nathan leave. Someone else had heard why. "She cheated," a junior editor whispered once, not quietly enough. Elena pretended not to hear, heat flooding her face. She told herself she deserved the scrutiny. That guilt was the appropriate response. But knowing that did not make it easier to carry. At night, she scrolled through old photos she refused to delete. Nathan smiling at her across a dinner table. Nathan asleep on the couch. Glasses crooked, trust unguarded. She tried to write him letters she never sent. Drafts filled with apologies, self-awareness sharpened by hindsight. "I didn't know I could lose you like that. I thought love was stronger than mistakes. I thought you would fight for us." The last sentence always stopped her, because beneath the grief lived a harder truth. She had assumed his forgiveness, assumed his endurance, assumed that love meant elasticity without limit. And now she lived inside the consequence of that assumption. She dated too eventually. Men who were attentive. Men who listened when she spoke about loneliness and pressure. Men who offered validation without asking too many questions. But every time intimacy approached, she felt the echo of Nathan's absence. The way he had left without rage, without negotiation. It haunted her more than anger ever could have. Months passed. In Seattle, winter settled in. Nathan watched snow fall against the office windows, felt its quiet persistence mirror his internal state. He functioned, but something remained unresolved, suspended. One evening after a long day, he stood in the shower longer than necessary, water hot against his skin, and felt unexpectedly tears. They surprised him, not because they came, but because they came without a clear reason. It wasn't Elena he mourned. It was the version of himself who had believed love could be safe without vigilance. He dried off slowly, sat on the edge of the bed, and acknowledged what he'd been avoiding. Walking away had protected his dignity, but it had also cost him his softness. That was the price. In Brooklyn, Elena attended a mutual friend's engagement party alone. She dressed carefully, smiled when required, answered questions with practiced restraint. Someone asked if she was seeing anyone. "Not seriously," she replied. They nodded, understanding more than she said. Later that night, tipsy and exhausted, she stood on the balcony overlooking the city, phone in hand. She searched Nathan's name again, knowing nothing would appear. Still nothing. The silence had not faded with time. It had grown heavier, more instructive. For the first time, Elena understood that some losses were not meant to be processed together. Some reckonings were solitary by design. She had wanted forgiveness. Instead, she had been left with reflection. Nathan received an email one morning from an old mutual friend. Casual, unassuming. Saw Elena the other night. She asked about you. Didn't push. Just thought you should know she still carries it. Nathan stared at the screen for a long time. He felt no satisfaction, no vindication, only a distant sadness for both of them. He closed the email without replying, not because he was cruel, but because some distances, once chosen, must be honored completely. That night, for the first time in months, Nathan dreamed of the future. Not a specific person, not a repaired past, but a version of himself that might someday feel fully present again. The aftermath, he understood, was not about punishment or regret. It was about learning to live with what remains after love has changed shape. Time did not soften the past. It reorganized it. 3 years passed, not dramatically, not cleanly, but in the way years usually do, through promotions, relocations, changing phone models, new routines layered over old instincts. Nathan Cole no longer introduced himself as someone recently uprooted. Seattle had become familiar enough to stop feeling provisional. He was a senior partner now. The title looked good on paper. The responsibility suited him. People listened when he spoke, trusted his judgment. There was a quiet irony in that. He could design spaces meant to hold people, even though he still felt cautious about letting anyone fully inside himself. His life was orderly, predictable, safe, and yet something remained unfinished. The reminder came on a Wednesday afternoon, disguised as a professional obligation. Nathan had flown to San Francisco for an architecture conference. 2 days of panels, networking, polite ambition. At a gallery opening hosted by one of the sponsors, he wandered alone through a converted warehouse filled with installations about memory and urban erosion. That was when he saw it. A photograph, mounted large against a concrete wall, a Brooklyn street corner at dusk, rain slicking the pavement. The glow of storefronts reflected like fragments of a life paused mid-motion. Dean Street. His chest tightened, not sharply, but undeniably. He stepped closer, reading the plaque beneath the frame. Photographer, Elena Wright. The room seemed to recede. For a moment, Nathan considered walking away. He had practiced that skill well, but something held him there. Curiosity, perhaps, or the quiet insistence of unfinished emotion. The photograph wasn't sentimental. It wasn't romanticized. It was precise, restrained, the kind of image that captured absence rather than presence. He recognized himself in it. Later that night, alone in his hotel room, Nathan searched her name for the first time in years. Elena had left editorial media and moved into documentary photography. Her work focused on transitional spaces, apartments after move-outs, streets at night, places shaped by departure. She had an exhibition scheduled in Seattle the following month. The coincidence felt deliberate, though he knew it wasn't. He closed the laptop without buying a ticket. Elena felt the reminder weeks later, thousands of miles away, in a quieter form. She was visiting her mother in Connecticut, helping clean out boxes in the attic. Artifacts of a life her parents were downsizing with careful reluctance. In one box labeled miscellaneous, she found an old notebook. Not hers, Nathan's. She recognized his handwriting instantly. Precise, architectural, even in cursive. Sketches of furniture layouts, notes from early projects. Tucked between pages, a list written years ago. Things that feel like home. Morning light through tall windows. Silence that isn't uncomfortable. Someone who tells the truth even when it's hard. Elena sat on the attic floor for a long time. Notebook open in her lap, dust gathering on her jeans. She had built a life since then, a quieter one, a more honest one, she liked to believe. Therapy had helped, not by absolving her, but by teaching her how to live with accountability without drowning in it. She had loved again, briefly, carefully, never with the same assumptions. Nathan had not been her great love because of passion or intensity. He had been her great love because he had trusted her without armor. That was what she had lost. When her exhibition date approached, a mutual friend mentioned, casually, almost as an afterthought, that Nathan was back in Seattle permanently. Elena nodded, said nothing. She did not reach out. The opening night was crowded, too crowded. Nathan almost didn't go. He stood outside the gallery for several minutes, hands in his coat pockets, watching people file in. He wasn't afraid of seeing her. He was afraid of feeling nothing, or worse, something unresolved. Inside, the walls were lined with images that felt intimately unfamiliar. Places emptied of people, rooms paused between purposes, loss rendered with restraint. He recognized her voice before he saw her. "Elena?" She turned. Time had changed her subtly. Less softness, more composure. Her eyes steadier. Older, not in years, but in consequence. "Nathan," she said. They stood facing each other, surrounded by art that seemed to narrate their silence. "You came," she said, not accusing, not hopeful. "So did you," he replied gently. They smiled, a reflex born of familiarity rather than comfort. They did not hug. Conversation came slowly, carefully, work, travel, neutral territory. They spoke as two people who had once known each other deeply and now respected the distance between who they were and who they had been. "I saw your photograph," Nathan said eventually. "The Brooklyn one." She nodded. "I didn't expect you to. It was honest." She looked relieved by that. "I try to be." There was so much they didn't say, about forgiveness, about regret, about whether leaving had been the right choice. Neither of them asked for answers. "I'm glad you're doing well," Elena said. He believed her. "I'm glad you found something that fits," he replied. She smiled, small and real. "So did you." They stood in silence, not awkward, not heavy, just complete. When they parted, it was without ceremony. No promises, no invitations. Outside, Nathan breathed deeply, as if releasing something he'd been carrying unconsciously. Elena watched him walk away, noticing that the ache she expected did not come. What remained was quieter, truer. That night, alone in their respective spaces, both understood the same thing. What had been lost could not be recovered, but it had not been wasted. They were not meant to reconcile. They were meant to be changed. There was no moment when everything settled into place. Acceptance did not arrive like a conclusion, neatly tied. It emerged instead through repetition, through mornings that no longer felt heavy, through memories that no longer demanded interpretation. For Nathan, acceptance looked like ordinariness. Weeks after the exhibition, life resumed its familiar rhythm. Meetings, deadlines, long walks through neighborhoods he no longer thought of as temporary. The encounter with Elena did not reopen wounds the way he'd feared, nor did it heal them completely. It clarified them. One evening, Nathan found himself cooking dinner while rain traced thin lines down the window. He noticed absently that he was humming, something he hadn't done in years. The realization stopped him. He wasn't happy in the way movies promised. He wasn't fulfilled by romance or vindicated by distance. But he was intact. That mattered more. He had begun slowly to let people in again. Not romantically at first. Friendships. Conversations that moved beyond logistics. He listened without scanning for threat. He spoke without rehearsing exit strategies. When attraction appeared, it did so gently, tentatively. He didn't pursue it immediately. He didn't shut it down either. He had learned the difference between boundaries and walls. Late one night, unable to sleep, Nathan opened an old folder on his laptop, photos he'd archived and forgotten. Trips, birthdays, a life that once felt inevitable. He looked without flinching. What struck him wasn't pain, it was proportion. That relationship had shaped him, but it no longer defined him. Leaving had not erased his capacity to love. It had preserved his capacity to respect himself. He closed the folder and turned off the light. For Elena, acceptance took a different form. After the exhibition, she returned to her apartment and sat on the floor amid unopened boxes. Her life had become something of a series of transitions, sublets, residencies, borrowed spaces that never quite rooted themselves. She used to think that was punishment. Now she understood it differently. Her work thrived because it came from truth. Not the polished truth of redemption arcs, but the quieter truth of consequence. She photographed spaces people abandoned, sometimes by choice, sometimes by necessity. Walking away, she'd learned, was not always cowardice. Sometimes it was the most honest response available. In therapy, she spoke less about guilt now and more about responsibility. The difference mattered. Guilt fixated on self-condemnation. Responsibility asked what she would do differently, how she would show up without assuming elasticity where none was promised. She had stopped telling the story of Nathan as a tragedy. Instead, she told it as a turning point. One night, she received an email from a young woman who had seen her work. "Your photos feel like someone choosing themselves," the message read. That gave me permission to do the same. Elena sat with that sentence for a long time. She had once believed that being chosen was the highest form of love. Now she understood that choosing oneself, without malice, without spectacle, could be just as profound. They did not speak again. There was no follow-up message, no accidental crossing of paths. Their lives continued on separate trajectories, intersecting only in memory. And even that grew quieter with time. And that was enough. Nathan no longer framed his leaving as loss. Elena no longer framed his absence as abandonment. Both had learned to hold the truth without reshaping it to ease discomfort. Walking away had not been an act of punishment. It had been an act of self-preservation. Nathan preserved his integrity. Elena preserved the lesson. Neither outcome was clean. Neither was cruel. They were simply real. Years later, long after the sharpness had dulled into something almost instructive, both would look back and recognize the same thing. Not every love story is meant to be repaired. Some are meant to end precisely where they do, so the people inside them can continue, separately, honestly, and whole. Leaving in the end had not been the opposite of love. It had been its boundary. And within that boundary, both of them learned how to live again.